Good morning, everyone. There's still some people who haven't appeared yet, but we'll let them in as they appear. I want to welcome you all to the Connecticut River Conservancy webinar. What does it mean for Brattleboro? Our guests this morning, our presenters, I should say, are Brett Morrison, who represents the CRC in community relationships and fundraising across the watershed. And Kathy Urffer is the CRC's Vermont, New Hampshire River Steward, a very important job. So thank you both for being here with us this morning, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks very much. And I know many of you on the call, and just the other side bit about being the river steward is also I'm a Brattleboro resident and have been for a long time. So I think Brattleboro actually gets a disproportionate amount of my attention when you think of the watershed. I'm going to share my screen here and go through a quick, well, I hope it'll be relatively quick slideshow of a little bit of background about the organization, just to provide a little context, and then hopefully also prompt some questions, right? And then we can talk more specifically about the things that we're working on in Brattleboro. But again, Connecticut River Conservancy is the organization for, 50 years-ish. It was known as the Connecticut River Watershed Council. And so currently, big staff, our main office is in Greenfield, but with COVID, we're all working out of our houses all over the watershed, and we have adjusted to being much more remote, which is actually better for our work given the geographic scope. And in the picture here is Ron Rhodes, who's our restoration manager, who works in all 4 states, myself, Andrea Donlin, who's our outgoing Massachusetts river steward, and Kelsey Wentling, who has been river steward in Connecticut for a number of years and is actually taking over in Massachusetts. And we are right now in the process of hiring an additional river steward in New Hampshire, so I can stop being schizophrenic and just pay attention to Vermont, and river steward in Connecticut. So expanding our resources to do more work, hopefully. So again, Connecticut River Watershed goes from the border of Canada to the Long Island Sound. It's 400. The river itself is about 410 miles long, and covers area in 4 states. And if you break it down for my area in Vermont and New Hampshire, it's essentially all of the blue in this picture of New Hampshire. These are the sub-watersheds. So sort of a third of New Hampshire, the Western Shore, I call it. And then in Vermont, similarly, it's the eastern kind of half of the state. And we obviously work, when there are smaller watershed organizations, we work in partnership with those groups that work on some of these sub-watersheds as well. So why do we exist? Because, our rivers over the course of, hundreds of years have been severely impacted. And so just a little overview of some of the things that we are concerned about and trying to work on in terms of impacts to rivers are point sources and non-point sources of pollution. So thanks to the Clean Water Act, a lot of the things that are coming out of pipes, right, wastewater treatment facilities or industrial facilities, things like that, have been cleaned up. A big part of the pollutants actually entering our streams are non-point, which end up in storm drains and then go through those pipes to enter the waterways. We still have systemic issues with our waste streams. So there's trash everywhere, and we do a big cleanup every year to try to address this, but it all ends up going downstream from no matter where it ends up on the land. And then, as I mentioned, stormwater is a big issue. I think we have acclimated kind of the frog in the pot to be able to see something like this storm drain, and think that's normal, or think that's just the way it is. And more I'm trying to help people see that this is not normal. When you would look at our rivers in the 50s, they would have been full of sewage, right? Now you look at them and you see them as clear. And so if the river were full of sewage right now, it would be horrifying. Similarly, this is actually a horrifying thing to see, right? The amount of dirt and stuff that comes off of our roads and then gets put right into our rivers. And then in the face of climate change, pretty severe impacts because of weather pattern changes. So much more rain in the winter, which means more runoff, which will mean more flooding in the spring, and then much less rain at the, primarily end of the summer, which will mean more drought. And then also anticipated stronger storms in September. So our weather patterns are going to be getting more extreme, which means we need to adapt quickly to try to anticipate how the water is going to flow off the land and what that means for our built infrastructure. And then because of the nature of the, geology of New England, there are a lot of dams, hydroelectric dams, and just leftover industrial dams that are sitting in our waterways. So a big part of our work also ends up focusing on the impacts to dams and trying to, help our rivers heal from those impacts. So what that means in terms of what we do is this list, and I'll run through some examples of these. Advocacy, focusing on commenting on regulation, permits, and rules. We have a whole community science program where we try to bring people out to the river and teach them and help them actually engage in our resources. A lot of focus on recreation, because you don't take care of what you don't love. And so if you don't have a relationship with the river and you're not on it, it's much harder to see the need to take care of it. So really getting people out there is important. Restoration work, on the ground restoration work, using big yellow machines often, and then outreach and education, like this presentation. And then I go into schools a lot. We're doing a big project right now, actually with the Academy School. So digging in each one of these a little bit, advocacy work. And this is what I mean by the number of dams. There are literally thousands of dams in our watershed, many of them in the woods, built 100 years ago, that are not being used for anything now, right? So, and more they're becoming kind of a liability. So we're having more and more property owners who have dams on their property that are silting in, and they would like help getting them out. And so we can help with that entire process. But another issue is the hydroelectric dams, which I'll talk about briefly. So basic ecological impacts of dams. When you put a dam in a river, it changes the entire ecology of the area. So by slowing that water down, it drops sediment behind the dam, changing the habitat behind the dam, and also starves the area below the dam of sediment, which changes that habitat, changes, the water temperature, because since the water is not moving, it's not getting oxygenated, it's heating up. And so that changes the entire habitat for the species that are adapted to our rivers. And obviously an obstacle for fish being able to move up from the sea. So another aspect is additional impacts from hydroelectric dams, which is a complicated discussion, because they're also really important for green electricity on our grid. So while we take the little dams that aren't being used out of the river, for hydroelectric dams, we acknowledge that they're really important, and it's more a question of working through their relicensing process to have them make more ecological choices while they're continuing to generate electricity, making the best choices they can to protect the river and enhance the river. So right now, and actually for the past decade, we've been involved in the relicensing of these 5 big hydro projects on the river. You'll recognize many of them, but up north, Wilder Dam, Bellows Falls Dam, Vernon Dam, and then in Massachusetts, the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Facility on Northfield Mountain, and the Turner's Falls Dam. And so these are pretty large federal proceedings that we've been intensely involved with and are hoping to see come to a close pretty soon here. But just as an example of impact, we have a bunch of species of fish that come up the river to spawn. In an ideal situation, you would have this many pass the Holyoke Dam, some go off and find places to spawn, this many would pass Turner's Falls, and then you would have that many pass Vernon, right? multiply that by the 100,000 for each one of those little fishes. The situation we have right now is the passage at Turner's Falls, and this is one of the ones that's being relicensed. You only get that many paths. So because of our advocacy down in Holyoke many years ago, they installed a fish ladder, which is helping support those migratory species and getting good numbers to pass. In Turner's Falls, it's terrible. And so the fish are hitting Turner's Falls and are becoming exhausted and dying with the American shad. And very few of them are able to get upstream to further spawning grounds. And then the passage through Vernon is pretty good, but we will attempt to improve that also in this next relicensing. So another big advocacy thing we do is this annual Source to Sea river cleanup, where we actually go out and pull trash out of the rivers and invite everybody to join us with that. These are like, we do big cleanups. So sometimes there's things that are just staffed by CRC where we actually need like a crane or a winch, or we need divers or whatever for like really big stuff. And then there's also community cleanups. This is folks up the top there. That's George from the Brattleboro Rotary, who's been cleaning up the island every single year for, I think, at least 4 or 5 years now. So literally thousands of volunteers between the Long Island Sound and Canada going out in their local watershed, picking up garbage, and we help organize that and support them with how you do that cleanup. Community science work. I like to point this out, especially in Vermont. We hear so much about phosphorus and the Lake Champlain and the TMDL, which is really important that we address that. On our side of the state, the issue is more focused on nitrogen, which we hear less about. And partly this has to do with whether the receiving water body is freshwater or saltwater. Phosphorus and nitrogen do the same things in water bodies. They stimulate, organic growth and plant growth. They support cellular life, right? Even in our own bodies. So what happens when you have phosphorus overloaded in a freshwater body of water is an overgrowth of plant life, which dies off and then uses all the oxygen, and that's what damages the ecosystem. Similarly, for saltwater, nitrogen is the catalyst that does that same thing. It's not to say that phosphorus is not an issue in the Connecticut River and nitrogen is not an issue in Lake Champlain. They are pollutants in both cases when they enter the waterways. But the trigger and the political focus for the Connecticut River is on nitrogen because of the dead zone in Long Island Sound. And because the Connecticut River empties into Long Island Sound, the nitrogen that we send downriver contributes to the damage and the dead zone in the sound. And by dead zone, I mean no oxygen whatsoever. So there's an area of Long Island Sound where nothing can live. So we need to, focus our advocacy on both sides of our state and think about this really holistically. But as I said here, you can see from this image, the Connecticut River is a huge drainage into Long Island Sound. We are probably not the primary source of nitrogen. Because of the area around New York City, there's a huge amount of pollutants coming in there, but we do contribute. And so, as an organization, we ignore political borders as much as possible and try to think holistically about the watershed and our cumulative impacts, right? And so that's why we care about, even though we're way upstream, we still care about the nitrogen load finding its way downstream. Just to drive that home, this is a picture of right after Tropical Storm Irene. Some of you may have seen this. This is the sediment. These are basically our farm fields. It's not funny. Were eroded in Tropical Storm Irene and found their way into Long Island Sound. So some of our adaptative work is to make sure our stream banks aren't eroding and we keep our sediment up here where we need it. So another community science effort is helping to support water quality monitoring all through the region. And again, there's some smaller groups that just do it on their own, and we support them in whatever way we can. We do some water quality monitoring ourselves in Massachusetts and southern Vermont, and support all of the other organizations doing it. And then my favorite, we have also been starting to survey for sea lamprey nests in a lot of our streams up here in Vermont and New Hampshire. Sea lamprey are a migratory species that comes up the river to spawn, and they're beautiful, creepy, historic, prehistoric looking things with little nasty sucker teeth. They're my favorite. What you can see here on the left is this sea lampreys, actually, they build nests. And so they take their little sucker teeth, they turn the rocks over, and they make a sweet little nest. They spawn even in the West River, just above the marina. I can walk you there and show you some nests. And then when these creatures are coming up to river to spawn, they're dying. So they've gone blind, they have stopped eating, they are spawning, and then they've brought the nutrients in their body up the rivers to help feed some of our resident fish in the river. So, one example of the several migratory species that come up the river to spawn, the babies of the sea lamprey live in the sediment for up to 7 to 12 years, and then they will head out to sea and live their adult lives in the ocean. And so on the right here, you see a leaky and some volunteers. We actually measure the nests, and this picture was taken in the Saxtons River, the mouth of the Saxtons River. Recreation, so bringing people to the water. We, as a nation, when we started polluting our waters, we literally turned our backs on them from a developmental perspective, right? Our downtown faces downtown. Downtown is where it is in Brattleboro because of the Whetstone Brook and the West River. But we turned our back as we polluted the river, and we don't face it anymore, right? And now, because of the Clean Water Act, as our rivers become more and more clean, there's an opportunity to really turn around and face the river again and consider it an asset and understand how it is an asset in our communities. So, we try to do events in general, paddling events, and educate people on the water. This year, I hopefully will be taking a bunch of the legislators out from both Vermont and New Hampshire on some pontoon boat rides all up and down the river, just to talk a little bit, bring their attention to the river and talk a little bit about the needs of the Connecticut River. We help to manage what's called the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail, which is primitive campsites all along the river where you could actually paddle it and do a multi-day paddle. And we have a phone app that we've developed with the intention of helping people who are on the river connect into the communities with businesses, restaurants, B&Bs, Sam's, for instance, while they're doing a multi-day paddle. And trying to re-engage the idea that the river is a recreational resource. I get calls routinely from people in Connecticut and New York who want to come up and paddle, but they need help understanding where they can park their car, if they can leave a trailer, what's a good place to put in, things like that. So there's incredible potential, economic potential for our communities along the river to engage in the recreational economy and bring people to the river, and then also into our communities because of that. So to that end, one of the things that Brett has been working really hard on is a Riverfest weekend in Brattleboro, which will be on August 6th and 7th. And this encompasses both events along the river by the Whetstone. We're partnering with the Whetstone restaurant. And then on Sunday, the New England Paddle Sport Championship race. And so this race has been going on for 50 years, I think. Brett will probably know. All over the Connecticut River for many years. It was held up in Westmoreland. And we are trying to reinvigorate this race, bring more people. It's not a race you have to, amateurs could do it. There's a short one. So we're trying to get young people maybe at the high school with their parents to do a tandem boat but basically get people in the river for fun, over this weekend. And then a little bit about our restoration work. This is an example of the sort of one of the types of on the ground projects we do. So this is a low head dam removal. This was on the Ashweelit River. We took out, I don't know, probably about 10 years ago at least. And so what you see that looks like a small barrier, but that is a pretty big barrier for the fish that might be migrating up the river and the fish that are in the river. So even thinking about trout. And so in this case, that dam is not being used for anything. And we are able to identify grants to do the engineering that is needed and then pay for the deconstruction to take that dam out. And as a matter of course, we use local contractors. So and local engineers to do that work. So as for instance, ARPA money is coming into the state and there's more and more federal funds for these type of projects. We consider this a way to sort of funnel that money into projects that would help the river, but also help to support a lot of our local small businesses in doing projects like this. And so in this case, you can see the picture on the right is right after the dam was taken out and we plant the area. So in all cases, we're restoring the area right along the river by putting in native trees and shrubs to revegetate that spot. This is a dam off a tributary that goes to the West River that came out about 4 years ago. Again, this is an example of one that literally is just in the woods. Used to be used for a mill or maybe a farm or something, but it was a very long time ago. There were actually 2 dams on this stretch. One was a little log dam and then this concrete dam, which is a little newer. So in this case, we left the wing walls in. In some cases, there's a historical consideration to know that it was there. So we may leave a portion of the dam if there's a reason from a historical perspective, or if it's not needed. In this case, we were able to fully restore the river by just taking the center section out. And it looks a little mucky there, but you'd be amazed how quickly things grow back and how quickly the fish move. Ron, who's often on site for our dam removals, will, within hours of a dam being breached, will see fish start to move upstream. Fish that have not been able to move upstream for 100 years in that area. So it's kind of astounding. And then we work a lot with farmers and other, big landowners to just restore riparian buffers along streams. So that's essentially, an area along the stream that you kind of want forested. And those trees protect the stream from pollutants that are running off the land or off farm fields by slowing the water down and letting it infiltrate in that vegetated area. It provides habitat. And then it also helps to cool the stream. Having the trees along the stream and the shade helps to keep the water cool. And as we face climate change and the world is literally heating up, that's a real consideration for our native trout. And so getting more and more trees along streams will help our trout over the coming decades be able to, flourish. And again, we do all the work. So if we have a willing landowner who is willing to do this type of project on their land, we find the funding, we do the project management, we hire the engineers, we hire the construction crew, and we just handle it so that the landowner doesn't have to deal with all of the minutia of those things. And then outreach and education. So 2 examples here from Brattleboro. The one on the left is a new design for Melrose Terrace. And so many of you may remember during Tropical Storm Irene, Melrose Terrace was badly flooded. And, that entire housing area was for seniors, right, which was built in the 60s. And so wisely, the Brattleboro Housing Partnership found funding to move those folks out of the floodplain, right, which is we continue to learn and evolve, but it was a bad decision. And we have a lot of other folks in the floodplain in Brattleboro. And ideally, we would move them out and return the floodplain to the river. And that is exactly what's happening here at Melrose Terrace. If anyone drives down there, you'll see the big yellow machines are working right now. So those houses that are along the brook have been demolished. The sediment is being removed to lower the floodplain purposefully, so that in high water, when the whetstone floods, it has a place to come out, spread on the banks, release its energy and sediment, slow down, so that we do not get impacted downtown like we did in 2011. So this is a really beneficial project for protecting everything downstream of Melrose Terrace. And it's also going to be a really beneficial project because it's providing recreational access and open space to people in the town. This is also right across the street from Academy School. So I've been working right now with Erin Maley O'Keefe from the Human Connection Project on a whole education piece with a 4th grade class and a 6th grade class, and with the Academy School in particular, to start to envision this site as an outdoor classroom and an asset for the school to be able to go over there, learn about waterways, learn about habitat, all of that. So we're hoping we'll be doing many projects this summer and hoping to get some people out there fishing, kids out there fishing, as we see this restoration project develop. So one kind of example. And then on the right is on the parking deck on the first level down at the bottom by the elevator. This is the work that we did with the Brattleboro, the Brattleboro Downtown Alliance, and Ask the River artists, Evie Lovett, Elizabeth, sorry, I'm trying to talk too fast. Andrea Wasserman and Elizabeth Billings, who we've been working with for several years on a lot of different projects to provide community engagement around thinking about the river and connecting to the river. And so the deck, each level is now a different species that's related to the river. And at the bottom layer here, you can see there's a write-up talking about the indigenous perspective on these animals and some information about them to sort of teach the public, and to also re-envision the parking garage downtown as kind of a migratory pathway. And so you could say I'm on the otter deck instead of, number 3. So I am in the privileged position to, have this really lovely job where the main thing I am paid to do is to love the river and love the communities along the river, and to think about a healing process for what can create, what can enhance and help to flourish our communities. And so this is kind of a word map of what my job, and I think what CRC's work encompasses. And with that, I will stop so that we have time to talk a little bit more about specific things in Brattleboro, or answer questions or whatever.
I've been able to just run through a few questions real quick that popped up during your presentation. One of them was about how to get businesses involved, which I'll cover. The other one was more about how to get students involved from CCV. And I think while we're answering that, maybe we could talk about, you covered some of what you're doing with elementary, but our hopes for high school students involvement as well. Question about whether we're participating with town government on the Melrose Bridge. I suggested in the chat that VR, Vermont River Conservancy, is more the direct partner on that particular part of Whetstone, but you could address that. And then how do we work with local partners came up, and I tried to answer that, but you have a better perspective. And then, but we'll get to those. Was there anything anyone wanted to ask of Kathy now that we've opened up the mics? And
feel free to unmute yourselves, and we're a small enough group, we can actually have a conversation.
Hi, David.
Hi. I had a question about what are your sort of perspectives on the longer range population growth that we are probably going to get due to environmental changes throughout the country? and what kind of plans and processes might CRC be working on or leading to lead that conversation? Because there's going to be a lot more people coming in, and that's going to put more stress on resources, increase dependency on the river, potentially, increased economic activity that's going to impact the river. So
yeah, we have a lot of partners that we work with that are, and when you think of like, the answer to that question is zoning probably. And for Brattleboro, I was on the planning commission for a number of years. I think we have a lot in place to be able to allow development in a way that would be protective of our ecosystem. I would say it's a bigger issue for a lot of the smaller towns that don't have staff and may not be kind of anticipating what's coming. And so, we work with a lot of local partners. And so the two groups that come to mind is the regional commissions, all of them, right? But for us, it's Wyndham Regional, but as you go upriver, there's several more, and their engagement with those towns. And then also Vermont, the VNRC, Vermont Natural Resources Council. So because we are river focused, a lot of the times when you start to get into those larger land use planning questions, I defer to those other organizations that have their hands in that more. It's interesting, I think from our perspective in our work with landowners, it's more almost like a one-on-one or a word of mouth relationship. As we do a project, we often get the neighbor is curious about what we're doing. And so our work proliferates kind of that way, but we certainly support the efforts of the other organizations that are more focused on kind of those larger questions around land use planning, stuff like that. It's a serious consideration though. And one of the things we just, for the past 3 years, we were working to get policy to address surface water withdrawals in the state. All of the other states have some policy that is assessing who is withdrawing water for what, in what volumes. Vermont had nothing in place. And so as we were anticipating both climate change and that increased development, this is one of the things that sort of rose to the top as an area of concern, because you could definitely have situations where there may be a stream of a certain size where if you had a lot of users starting to take the water out, you could kill that stream, right, in an August. So over the past several years, we worked with several other partners in the state to get a bill signed into law, which was literally signed by the governor yesterday, which will create a system through the Agency of Natural Resources to assess water withdrawals and to identify right now who's using water, how much, right? And then to set up for the larger withdrawals, some sort of registration or permitting program that would in 2026. And so there'll be a process. Once the data is collected over the next couple of years, there will then be a process to figure out what permits may need to be in place to protect our surface waters. And so I'm pretty proud of that work and glad that we're starting to have a structure in place to make sure that we are equitably, thinking equitably about how we take water out of the stream. I mean, it's also from a business perspective, if you, or even a farmer's perspective, you could have been using water in a particular stream for decades, right? And all it takes is someone else to move in upstream of you and start to take that water out to impact you. And there had been no system in place to make sure that that use of a stream was equitable for both the stream's health, but also for the users along the stream. So
I think that's a question. I think that's am I getting garbled?
a little bit.
Huh. I think that's worthy of a retreat, a whole day up at the Grafton Village Inn, and a discussion with zoning administrators like Brian Bannon, who we have on this call, and regional planners and the like. I'm of a mind that we should start sending Conestoga west to wagons down to the southwest and inviting people to come back to the northeast because we've got the water. Just knowing how workforce strains have been a real problem for a lot of people in towns, and the aging population is going to stress services. I think it's a really interesting question for pros, cons, and how do we make sure whatever evolves, we're doing it well. So I'm glad to hear Kathy thinks we got the good groundwork. I'd like to say a little bit about Riverfest and then have a couple more questions. I think I can answer your questions about the college involvement in part through that. And I can also answer some of really this is meant to be both an educational and an FYI. I think you as attuned business leaders are probably more aware of how the environment plays into your own decision-making about locating here, or maybe people you hire, or quality of life. But a lot of people are kind of oddly unaware of the river. I think, was it you, Kate, who said you can drive across it for years and not really see it, even from until you're down on it? I know somebody had shared that perspective recently, and that in a way was my perspective, having gone over it on bridges for the first 10 years of my life, but not having been allowed to swim in it or really go near it. And then in the 80s, it was cleaner and you could finally start enjoying it. So around the same time Gina was starting to enjoy it up maybe on the Townsend and West River, I was plunging into the Connecticut down in Vernon. But can I shift a little bit to Riverfest, or how about one more question about anything we haven't addressed, full picture, and then I'd like to just share a little bit about Riverfest weekend. Does anyone thank you, David, for your question. Does anyone else have questions?
Please feel free to unmute and chime in. These are great questions.
And the other thing, this is a helpful introduction, Greg. Thank you, to begin conversations that either you think of later but want to have. So you'll have our contact information, and we're blessed to have the River Steward of Vermont and New Hampshire, and soon to be the dedicated Vermont River Steward, living in Brattleboro. The amount of work she puts in and connection between local, state, federal, that's a gift of the organization, but it's a role of the organization. It's a particular gift to have the person for Vermont with, let's say, a natural bias to Brattleboro. So we've got that going for us.
I try to be aware of, and in my mind, I'm using Brattleboro as like a pilot program where I can say, oh, I made this work here, so I'm taking it to Springfield or further up, St. Johnsbury or whatever.
Or
just a quick clarification. So there's two projects occurring on the Whetstone Brook, two floodplain restoration projects. There's one at Melrose Terrace. That property is owned by the Brattleboro Housing Partnership, including the bridge, and so they're managing that restoration project. And then Vermont River Conservancy owns the 12-acre parcel at 250 Burge Street. That will begin, I believe it'll begin construction next summer. They thought that they were all done with permitting, and Brian could probably explain more about this, and they ran into a snag. So that one is coming soon. And that's going to be a really important, it's a huge, beautiful parcel. If you haven't walked out there, it's pretty cool. And in fact, I took a school group from Four Rivers Charter School there about 2 weeks ago, and there's fresh beaver chews on there. So the creatures are ready to have that space, Go ahead, Brian.
Brian, did you want to?
Kathy, quick.
Sure. Oh, so the town hopes to take over that project and work with the Vermont River Conservancy, and the purpose of that is so we can get the hazard mitigation grant. FEMA just determined that the River Conservancy isn't actually eligible for that grant, and that's putting the project a little behind, but we hope to get back on schedule and have it going next year.
Thank you. So I'm going to launch off. A portion of us grew up around here. I'm not sure where about half of us grew up, but I know half of us, let's say, overlapped with the resurgence of a healthy river, the recovery of a healthy river, sort of 72 to mid 80s, I guess, before you would want to know whether the Putney paper mill was running or whatever else, and could really start enjoying it. And certainly, would you say last 20, it's been Class B, which is everything but drinking water, and really been in good shape for recreation. Since joining the CRC 3.5 years ago, I've heard plenty of firsthand horror stories from those who grew up in the 30s and 40s about, and 50s for that matter, just how dreadful and unsafe it was. Unfortunately, that was a hardier stock era, so they would go out and boat in it, but they knew better than to swim in it. We don't have that problem. So Riverfest weekend, in part, is a natural outgrowth of CRC's wanting to promote and encourage recreation, but more so over the last 3 years, we've realized promoting it and talking about it and encouraging it when much of our work is still in the clean water, healthy habitat space. So we say clean water, healthy habitat, thriving communities, thriving economies. An implication of that is, healthier communities are going to do better economically and have vibrancy. I would say we weren't active in that final space. So we would talk about and encourage recreation, and we were promoting access and trying to work with state level partners and local partners, but we weren't as deep in the weeds as we are with other parts of our programming, like water quality monitoring or community science. Diversity, equity, inclusion considerations really pushed us to look a little more self-critically about, if you're going to talk about it, do something about it. So it was a serendipity for us that the organization was realizing we need to stop talking about recreation. We need to stop talking about access and really do something by helping communities in the way we work with communities on so many other areas. We weren't really in the weeds of taking our resources that cover the breadth of local, state, federal. A community I was working with, say, down in Portland, was trying to do it on their own. We were encouraging and advising, but it was really difficult to navigate their own town's administration, the state Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and we didn't even get to Conti and US Fish considerations where we could help. Borrow the serendipity of flowing together and the confluence of things happening. Brattleboro has, I'm going to call it the gift of the bridges and island being returned to pedestrian use. And I know over the last half decade, that's included considerations of tearing down the bridges, isolating the island in one way or another. But the decision going forward has been made that those bridges will stay. They'll be repainted. They'll be refurbished with about an $8 million investment, and then handed over to the town of Hinsdale. When traffic shifts to the new bridge in spring, hopefully late spring, early summer of 2025, the riverfront for Brattleboro can be different than it's been for a century. So for some of us, it was great-grandparents, for others, great-great-grandparents, but there was a time where Brattleboro was completely tied to the river, and the whetstone, because of its low iron content, had a special role for town. But the river, and most everybody here probably knows the Island Park story, Vernon Dam was the beginning, I would say, of the end of that relationship with 1906 to 1909, I think the Vernon Dam went in and the water came up. And then we had some tremendous flooding and hurricanes in the 20s. Island Park, I think, was gone by 1930. We now have a chance, so roughly a century later, to really reimagine a relationship there. So Kathy and I were supporting what last year was a race run by Sandy Harris, running around that island. And Sandy, who some of you may know, also runs the Brattle Paddle in late June, had adopted this race to Kathy mentioned 50 years, that they're saying this is the 44th year of this race happening. It's been happening for the bulk of those 44 years in our stretch of river. sort of unbeknownst to everybody, because it's a race that brings racers together, but they had never tried to make it a river town benefiting or river town engaging or spectator experience. We knew when Kathy asked us to take it on, we didn't want to run a race just for the racers. We wanted to run a race that was relevant and had benefits to the community, and that played a real role in facilitating access. So race, bridge, island being converted to greenway and pedestrian space, that was the opportunity for us to work with the town and local partners and grow what was the New England Paddle Sports Championship into more of an event. So that's the Sunday portion. Over the last 5 months, we spent 3 of those months at least thinking Riverfest was going to be an afternoon add-on to that, to bring more of the community down. Kathy mentioned we have always tried to promote river opportunities. One of my best paddles was a paddle Kathy organized up. That was out of Windsor, right? The Sumner Falls or somewhere.
The Confluence paddle?
No, the one upriver where we got out at the Harpoon Brewery.
Oh yeah, that was Sumner Falls, yeah.
Yeah. So we try to offer people coming out with, but there's a cost, and we've always been concerned, how can we make cost not a barrier to participating with the river? Riverfest gives us that opportunity because we're seeking sponsors to underwrite all the costs and then offer people free experiences. So Riverfest is now the Saturday, August 6th that Kathy mentioned. It's going to have a host of on-river paddling opportunities. Leaders from Outdoor Hinsdale, which is a relatively recent outdoor promotional day they've organized, are going to take hikes up Mount Wantasticus, bike rides down the Hinsdale to Vernon Dam Rail Trail. We'll have art activities led by Brattleboro Museum and Arts Center and River Gallery School in the green space across from Whetstone Station. So between Whetstone Station, Norm's Marina, and across the island, this is year 1 of having a weekend that tries to bring people to the river to experience and see it in a new way. And if I haven't made it clear yet, the idea is through joy. CRC has done a lot of work bringing people to the river for service and community science. And there's a bit of a high bar for self-selection of people who care already. We want to bring people down through opportunities to just experience it and enjoy it. And from that, anticipate both better town citizens and better river stewards. So that's a rough sketch of how we've arrived in your town, in our town. I happen to be from Vernon. Kathy, as she said, lives in Brattleboro. So we very much are heavily vested in this personally as well as professionally in making it go. And we've said from the beginning, our little organization can't do it without collaborators. And fortunately, we've been met with such enthusiasm from the town of knowing what's possible now. In part, I think that it was 1819, there was some visioning that was done. Brian, you probably were involved or at least knew about that with the Wyndham Regional Commission and the Southwest Regional Planning Commission across the river. Your assistant town manager, Patrick Moreland, was a co-chair, I think, with his counterpart in Hinsdale. So we've got a lot of that good work to lean back on. So that's one of the ways businesses can be involved right away, is to help launch that successful event with us, either as volunteers or as sponsors, to make sure everything is free and we'll offer as much as we can pay for, essentially. And we're committed to stipending guides that are giving up their day of a summer weekend when they make their living to be with us sharing the river, as well as the artists who are taking time to come down and share seeing and experiencing the river through a creative activity. So there's going to be there's different ways. It's recreation and joy focused, but throughout it, there's going to be a strong opportunities to experience it through art and creativity as well. For those who either are physically or just unable or not inclined to go climb Wantasket or jump in a canoe, or go fly casting with David Dean up at West River Park. So that's an overview.
And I'll be getting more information out about this as we go along to our list. So you'll be hearing a lot more information about how you can participate, how you can be a sponsor, how you can volunteer, or how you can just come down and enjoy the weekend. So you'll be hearing a lot more from me about that.
Thank you, Greg. And I would love to use the last 5 minutes to actually hear from this group. The stroll is at least in limbo, if not happening again. For now, I think we would say it's in limbo. That was always an early June event. This is designed to stay in the space where this race has been held for years, because it fits within the racing community's schedule of traveling around. Riverfest is married to it this year, and until we know better, I would imagine it being married as sort of a weekend of activities, but there is the possibility in future years it could move. The beautiful thing to me, I think for merchants, businesses, it's equally between 4th of July weekend, where we rock anyway, and Labor Day, where we rock, and then of course foliage and into winter sports season. But to me, it's in a good spot where it is. We're really excited to be developing it here with community partners, and we want to promote it all summer long in a way that promotes everything Brattleboro and the region offers. So the weekend is a platform to celebrate healthy nature, getting outside and enjoying it, being active. So sort of that active lifestyle. God, I'm so lucky to live in this place. I'm going to walk down to the river. I'm going to go on the West River Rail Trail. Awareness. And that is bigger than Riverfest weekend, I would say.
Absolutely.
So,
are there any more questions for Kathy or Brett?
Or suggestions?
Or suggestions? If you want to be involved, please, you can contact me, or you can contact either one of them.
Brett, I was at I attended recently something at Hatch Space, which is a creative space in Brattleboro here, has rental offices and galleries and things like that. Anyway, and I can't remember the exact name of the organization, but it's basically, I think it's called the Vermont Arts Council.
Okay.
And they're a statewide organization that's broken up into, regional things. And they basically did a wine meet and greet, get together post-pandemic, what's happening in the art space or whatever. Apparently the legislature, I didn't follow up on this, but there was a very large multi-million-dollar bill that was supposedly passed for, or was looking like it was going to be passed for funding arts in general in Vermont. And I think that what the idea is that the state is looking at that as one of the economic cornerstones of our state. We have a lot of artists, photographers, painters, sculptors, you name it. And they're looking at, well, how can we draw tourism into the state using arts as a thing? And I think that as you're talking about the Riverfest weekend and involving the arts, I remember one time we were out paddling in the West River estuary area there, and there was like a little rowboat with a couple of cutouts of cows, and our daughter just thought that was the best thing, and it was cool. It was like public art, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, I know that the Vermont Arts Council is actively doing things in that space, and maybe that's an idea for you to see if you can research there, because I know there's supposedly a big chunk of money coming out of state budget for arts development.
Okay. We have a ringer on our team, and on this call, Lynn Barrett of Primetime Concepts is the longtime publisher of Southern Vermont Arts and Living. So Lynn is going to be helping us, particularly June 1 through the event, with promotion and marketing, and I'm sure she'll keep me on point with the arts themes. So, but that's such a good point. For a number of years, we had focused on the creative economy, and I think that I always understood that to have come out of a Vermont Council on Rural Development project, but maybe it was a state project before that. It seems a little quieter than it was for a time, but I think recreation and arts really go together in terms of that sort of risk-taking willingness, whether it's a recreation competitive risk or a creative risk, and the positive stuff that comes out of it. I'd just like to speak a little bit to high school and college age community involvement. Some of you may have kids, grandkids, nephews, nieces, neighbors. We are looking for volunteers, very much so. Over the next few weeks, we'll be signing people up. There are things for young people to do. I've got 2 interns, for example, from North Vermont Herman. They have an Echo Leaders Club, and 2 of their rising seniors want to be interns for the summer to help with social media amplification during the months leading up to this. That's a fabulous role for a young person. One of them also has film and photo skills and interests and wants to, over the course of the summer and that weekend, build as a project, sort of build the commercial for next year. So there are fun ways for kids. And when I say kids, I roughly mean a mature 14-year-old to 16, 17, 18 and up would be preferred. But, you know, if you know that contact at the high school and can refer Kathy or me to them, we'd welcome the introduction. If you know of somebody who you think needs purpose because they're playing video games or on their phone too often, or you know them less well, but think it could be a fun thing to be involved in, send them my way. We'll find a way to make the experience fun for them and meaningful.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. I'm disappointed we didn't have quite as many people, but I'm hoping I can lure Kathy and Brett into doing a reprise of this later on in the year, because and really try to promote it, because I think it's really great information, really interesting presentation from both of you, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more people who would find this information important and worth knowing about. So thank you both for your really great presentation. I'm so impressed, and I want to know more. So I think with that, we'll say good morning to you all, and thanks for coming. And hopefully we can do this again later in the fall. Thank you.
Hopefully a good update on relicensing even by then. Things are moving. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you both. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you, everybody.